rich get richer. It's just so disproportionate.
One, I don't even really believe that this is a democracy. I think that that's the front we would all like it to be. If you look at how the cops have been handling Occupy Wall Street, honestly, you're in a fascist state with choices. This is fascism with choices. You don't stay in a democracy. Live in one.
Is our food. You are hurting people. You are hurting people, dude. What's wrong with you, 4199? Is that all you are? A number that hurts people? Yeah, a violent fucking arm of the capitalist system that hurts people and doesn't let them eat. Congratulations, I bet your mom's proud.
Blast me, dude! Damn, what the fuck? You are tripping. You are tripping with that shit. Thanks for educating the youth and feeding the hungry. No, that's true. Yeah.
Take a step back.
Hey, guys.
Can you get this guy's name by any chance?
I don't see it.
No, I can't see it.
It's covered.
I don't understand why you do something like that at a non-violent protest. We're non-violent.
Stay right there. Back. Back that way. You were going to step back. I'm going to arrest you.
Dude, look at his gun. You must step back.
What is your name?
Hey.
If you don't like the corporations, if you don't like the influence that they have and that the government has become their puppets, then you should be down here. And it's as simple as that. So all this about what is their message, what are they asking, what are they talking about, is real easy. Corporate dominance, everybody can connect to that. And so that's been a unifying point. The second point is that by having these movements all over the country and having them under the same name, it unifies all of us as a group working together the same way that the corporations have all banded together to use their influence on Congress and to use their media to manipulate us. So if they can all join together, then why can't we?
Thank you, Mr. President. As you travel the country, you also take credit for tightening regulations on Wall Street through the Dodd-Frank law and about your efforts to combat income inequality. There's this movement, Occupy Wall Street, which has spread from Wall Street to other cities. They clearly don't think that you or Republicans have done enough, that you're in fact part of the problem. Are you following this movement, and what would you say to its people that are attracted to it?
Obviously, I've heard of it. I've seen it on television. I think it expresses the frustrations that the American people feel, that we had the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, huge collateral damage all throughout the country, all across Main Street. And yet, you're still seeing some of the same folks who acted irresponsibly trying to fight efforts to crack down on abusive practices that got us into this problem in the first place.
Absolutely do. I think this country is in a very big economic mess.
A serious economic crisis. The crash of Wall Street, the crash of the housing industry, a war in Afghanistan, a war in Iraq, and deregulation of Wall Street have led a ripple effect across the globe of catastrophic proportions. There's no question.
I am from Honduras, and American companies, they represent themselves as luxury. People who work in McDonald's, they only get about $300 per month. And me, because I'm a working class, I cannot eat at McDonald's. That's a luxury restaurant over there. So, yes, that's how they represent themselves.
The thing that brought me out today was a need and desire to join with others to help promote jobs and employment opportunities for those people who are hardest hit, and especially in the downriver area. I believe that people who own billions of dollars don't have the right to control the destiny of a whole community. You're talking about families and children, elders and seniors, people who are doing all that they can possibly that's morally and ethically fit to provide for their families and their health and welfare. So nobody who has $1 billion or $1 million or any any right, for that matter, morally or through the Constitution, deprive people of a right to life and a right to a decent life. That's unethical, it's unlawful, and it's downright immoral.
One of my members her family stayed next door to a 101-year-old woman that got evicted. So I got the phone call, and they told me that they put her out. They got 3 dumpsters in front of her house with 60 years of her belongings, and they got her out in front of the house on the gurney. So what we did, we kind of prioritized what to take out of the dumpsters because we were going to put her stuff back in the house. But we found out that it was an eviction through HUD, and we couldn't do it. Had it been a bank eviction, we could have put her stuff back in the house.
A lot of people have critiqued this movement as not having leaders and not having direction. And to explain briefly about how we're doing things in Detroit, which I'm not sure if it's the same as how people are doing it in other occupations, but we have the camp, which is kind of like the body or the heart, or maybe it's the raised fist of the movement. And then we have working groups, which are kind of like the arms and legs of the movement, media, facilitation, racial inclusion and sensitivity, outreach, all of these different working groups that kind of keep things going. And then we have the General Assembly. And the General Assembly is where we make community agreements. And we're using a consensus process, a modified consensus process, where it's kind of like Democracy Plus. It's a supermajority where in a normal representative democracy that most people are familiar with, you kind of get the most people on your side, and then you push your ideas, what you want, your agenda through. And what we're saying is actually that's not the best way to come up with the solutions that we need, for the next 50 years, for the city. What we need is an inclusive process that's directly democratic, not representatives, but directly democratic, that includes everyone's voice.
And the one thing about this movement is they're not going to be able to kill this movement the way they killed the civil rights movement because there are no figureheads here. In fact, I'm not even speaking on behalf of Occupy Wall Street Now or the committee because I have not been authorized to speak on behalf of any of them. And I like it that way. I'm speaking for myself as a person who's down there. And that way, they can't take away a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X or any the American Indian movement leaders or anyone else and then watch this thing die. Because here, you squeeze one part of the balloon, it just swells up somewhere else.
This isn't even really a political movement. It's not a bipartisan movement. It's a movement to amend the injustices that we have incurred as a society over a long period of time, so slowly that most Americans haven't even realized the advantages that have been taken from them by corporate influence, corruption in government, and things like that.
Money jitters? Ask the obliging Bank of America for a jar of soothing instant money, M-O-N-E-Y, in the form of a convenient personal loan.
The real deception is when we distort the value of money. When we create money out of thin air, we have no savings, and yet there's so-called capital. So my question boils down to this: how in the world can we expect to solve the problems of inflation, that is, the increase in the supply of money, with more inflation?
Well, when you print money the way our government is printing it, it's basically been devalued because they're printing so much of it. They don't seem to know where the off switch is.
A lot of people felt the Federal Stimulus Act wasn't big enough. It was sort of like like 10 cc's out of 20 were loaded into a hypodermic and injected in the economy, and it was like not enough adrenaline to get the heart going again.
The country has an economic problem because of our way of looking at economics, to phrase it that way. The earth and the way I think God actually created it is made up of exponential potential. It is not actually made up of debt. I don't go to a tree and tell the tree, you're minus 3 apples. Debt is a human and a man-made device that we think of. Nature and things that are natural don't go by those laws.
Information that we get from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners is that 6% of gross domestic product is lost through crime of the corporate nature. internal or external. Now, I don't know what the gross domestic product is, but I think it's at least maybe $10 trillion or maybe even more, but let's say it's $10 trillion. Then that would mean that let me see if I'm saying this right, $100 billion would be the cost every year of corporate crime. And that's something like a factor of 3 or 4 times what street crimes cost. Then why is law enforcement putting all their energy into this low-level stuff and not this high-level stuff?
And then also in 2010, there was a Supreme Court ruling that even deregulated our campaign finance rules even further without the say of the American people. I didn't even hear about it until after the fact, and that made me very angry.
The United States government decides it needs some money, so it calls up the Federal Reserve and requests, say, $10 billion. The Fed replies, saying, sure, we'll buy $10 billion in government bonds from you. So the government takes some pieces of paper, paints some official-looking designs on them, and calls them Treasury bonds. Then it puts a value on these bonds to the sum of $10 billion and sends them over to the Fed. In turn, the people at the Fed draw up a bunch of impressive pieces of paper themselves, only this time calling them Federal Reserve notes, also designating a value of $10 billion to the Fed.
My finger actually points to the banks, because when you have money or paper wealth, and in this new age, virtual wealth, now your currency is digital. You get it off a strip of rust on the other end of a plastic card. So therefore, you can only have a society that is going to be hyperinflated. Like, the nature of it itself is going to ask for a constant rise in prices, because there has to be enough money to actually cover the interest. And that's exactly what the government is going through with the banks. And if that's constantly generating interest, then you constantly have debt. Like, it's a product of the system we live in.
Now, if this reality of inherent and perpetual inflation seems absurd and economically self-defeating, hold that thought, for absurdity is an understatement in regard to how our financial system really operates. For in our financial system, money is debt, and debt is money. Here is a chart of the U.S. money supply from 1950 to 2006. Here is a chart of the U.S. national debt for the same period. How interesting it is that the trends are virtually the same. For the more money there is, the more debt there is. The more debt there is, the more money there is. To put it a different way, every single dollar in your wallet is owed to somebody by somebody. For remember, the only way the money can come into existence is from loans. Therefore, if everyone in the country were able to pay off all debts, including the government, there would not be $1 in circulation.
We all agree that there's something fundamentally wrong with society the way it is right now. The Occupy movement is leaderless, and it doesn't have an ideology. It's not about any particular thing. It's about everything. It was formed in response, obviously, to the economic crisis and to the corruption in Wall Street infiltrating our political life.
Where the concept of the 99% and the 1% comes from is, well, basically the fact that 1%, the top 1% of the population of our country in general, as far as income goes, holds a significant amount of the wealth. I believe it's somewhere around 40% of the nation's wealth. It's an addiction to making money for the sake of making money, and they're not doing anything to disperse it or give it back at this point. We don't live in a trickle-down society like Reagan wanted to think. We live in a trickle-up society like nobody wants to admit.
When the banks were in trouble and they couldn't take care of their bills and everything, they appealed to the government like, hey, we can't do this, and we can't get this done. So they wanted the people and the government to understand they were unable to pay their bills. The reward they gave to the taxpayer was, we're going to foreclose on your homes. If you can't take care of it, we don't care that you can't pay your bills.
The poor stays poor, the rich get richer. It's just so disproportionate. out of here. Sometimes life